A widowed fisherman had caught only one fish that morning. It was all he had to eat. Then he found two starving orc sisters hiding among the river stones. He could have walked away, but he shared the fish with them. And at dawn, their father crossed the river to meet him. Torrenvale knew the river by its sound. High water hit the big stone with a deep, heavy voice. Low water slid over the top of it with a thin hiss, almost polite. That afternoon, the river was hissing. The first snow of the season had fallen in the night. Not much. A thin skin of it on the stones of the bank, gone where the sun had touched it, waiting where it hadn't. The air had the iron taste that promises more. Low water. Deep fish. A bad day. He pulled in his third line, and it came up light. The hook clean. The bait gone. He coiled the line around his forearm with the motion of a man who had done it 10,000 times and no longer needed to look. 37 years old. Hands like rope. An old scar crossing the back of his left hand. A hook had done that, not a war. Torren had never gone to war. The war had passed close by, twice, and moved on, like a flood that decides, at the last moment, not to take the house. The house stood 20 paces from the bank. Stone below, timber above, a roof he had rebuilt himself after the last hard winter. Outside, beside the ring of stones where he built his fire, there were 2 chairs. He only used one. The other was lower, with a woven straw seat that sagged in the middle. Mara had woven straw better than he fished, 2 winters since the fever took her, and the chair still sat there, turned toward the fire, catching rain and sun, and Torren had never put it away. Not because of a promise, because he could never decide when the right day for that would be. Every day was too soon. The 4th cast brought a fish. 1. The length of his forearm, fat enough for one man's supper, too thin for anything more. He cleaned it on the flat stone at the water's edge, tossed the guts into the current, and it was then, crouched with his hands in the cold water, that he heard the wrong sound. A stone rolling. Low water doesn't roll stones. He didn't stand up fast. A man who stands up fast announces that he heard. He finished washing his hands, picked up the fish, climbed the bank without hurry, and looked toward the elbow of the river, where the big rocks threw their shade. There was someone in among them. 2 of them. The first thing he saw was the green. Skin the deep green of work and weather, a forest green at the end of the day. Orcs. The second thing he saw was the size of the smaller one, a child, 9 winters, maybe 10, slumped against the rock with her eyes half open, the way eyes get when the body has given up on the day. Her clothes were wet to the waist. She was shivering in waves, and between the waves, she was not shivering at all, and it was the stillness between the waves that made Torren's chest go tight. He was a man of the river. He knew what it means when the cold stops hurting. The third thing he saw was the knife. The older one stood between him and the child, 25, 26 winters, shoulders built for carrying, work clothes torn at the knee and the sleeve. She was wet to the knees, and her lips had gone the gray that green skin goes when the blood pulls back from the surface. In her right hand, a fishing knife. Short blade, worn handle. Her knuckles were too stiff with cold to use it well, and they both knew that. And she held it anyway. She didn't raise it. She just let it be seen, held at her side, pointed at the ground. A warning, not a threat. Torren knew the difference. It was the same difference as high water and low. Nobody spoke. The river did the talking for all 3 of them. The child tried to sit up straight and couldn't. Her arm gave out and her shoulder scraped the rock, and the older one turned her head 1 finger's width toward the sound, without taking her eyes off Torren. That 1 finger of movement decided the whole afternoon. Torren raised the fish. Slowly, so the gesture couldn't be read wrong. Then he tipped his chin toward the ring of stones, toward the unlit fire, toward the 2 chairs. And he walked ahead of them, turning his back to the knife, because turning his back was the only sentence he knew how to say in that language. Behind him, after a long while, the stones let go of 2 sets of footsteps. Far upriver, thin against the hills, a horn sounded once. Torren almost missed it under the voice of the water. The older one didn't. Her head was already turned toward it, and it stayed turned long after the hills went quiet. He built the fire the way he built it every day. Dry bark below, kindling above, one spark from the flint, one breath. He spitted the fish on the roasting stick and set it between two stones. He didn't look at them. Looking was a question, and he had decided to ask nothing. They stopped at the edge of the firelight. The child sat first, straight down on the ground, too close to the flames, the way people sit when they have been cold for a long time. The older one stayed on her feet a while longer, measuring the house, the bank, the dirt path that vanished into the trees. The exits, Torin understood. She was counting the exits. Then she sat, too, on the ground, between the child and the path. Steam began to lift off their wet clothes, thin as breath. Torin went into the house and came back with a blanket and 2 river stones and set the stones at the edge of the coals. When they had drunk in enough heat, he wrapped them in sacking and put them against the child's feet without a word. Her boots, he stood upside down on stakes by the fire, the way you dry boots you intend someone to walk in again. The fish crackled over the coals. The smell rose, and the child stopped breathing for a moment. The child swallowed hard. The sound was loud in the silence, and she seemed ashamed of it, and pulled her knees against her chest. When it was done, Torin took the fish off the stick, opened it on the flat stone, and cut it into 3 with the tip of his knife. He didn't announce it. He didn't offer it with words. He pushed one portion toward the child, another toward the older one, and kept the third. The child ate. No ceremony, no thanks, with both hands, the way you eat when the body steps in front of the manners. Nobody corrected her. The older one didn't touch her share. She sat with her hands on her knees, watching her sister eat. Only when the child finished, when she licked her fingers and looked at the empty stone with the look of someone who is done, but not finished, did the older one move. She picked up her own portion, broke it in half with her fingers, and pushed one half across to her sister. Not a word. Not a sigh. Like someone paying a debt only she knew existed. Torin stopped chewing. He knew that gesture. Not from watching it. From doing it. It was the gesture of someone who has eaten last for so long it no longer feels like a choice. It was Mira's gesture in the bad winters, scraping the bottom of the pot onto his plate and swearing she'd already eaten in the kitchen. It was the gesture he himself would have made if there had been anyone on the other side of the fire to make it for. He looked at the orc woman for the first time. Truly. Not at the knife, not at the green of her skin, not at the small tusks that showed when she pressed her mouth shut. At the gesture. Then he did the only thing that made sense. He took his own portion, barely touched, set it on the stone in front of her, stood up, and walked down to the bank to check the night lines. The lines didn't need checking. They both knew that. When he came back, the stone was empty and clean, and the older one was staring into the fire with the expression of someone who has just lost an argument that never happened. The child was asleep before the fire burned low, curled on her side, head on her forearm, one bare foot sticking out from under the blanket Torin had brought from the house, without anyone asking. The older one tucked the blanket over her sister's foot with 2 fingers, in the dark, thinking he couldn't see. He saw. He said nothing. The 2 of them stayed awake on opposite sides of the fire. Him in his chair, her on the ground, back against the big stone, the knife still within reach of her hand, but farther than before, a hand's width farther. Torin measured that hand's width and kept it, the way a man keeps a good sign of weather. Snow began to fall again, small and dry, hissing where a flake found the coals. It settled on the world beyond the firelight, and left the ring of stones alone, and the circle of bare, dark ground held its shape against the white, the way the fire told it to. The river spoke for them for a long time. She was the one who broke it. Her voice came out low and a little rough, a voice that hadn't been used in days. You didn't ask anything. Torin poked the coals with a stick. A river doesn't ask where the water comes from. She turned her face toward him. In the dark, her eyes caught the light of the coals and turned amber, 2 warm points in the cold night. Is that a fisherman saying? No, I just made it up. The corner of her mouth moved. It never became a smile. It was the rough draft of one, erased before it was finished. But he saw the draft, and the draft was worth the night. Kyla, she said after a while, and she moved her chin toward her sister. Runa. Torin. She looked at the empty chair beside him, the low chair, the sagging straw, turned toward the fire like every night. She looked exactly long enough to understand, and not one moment longer. How long? She asked. She didn't ask what. She didn't need to. 2 winters. Kayla nodded slowly. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say any of the things people say. She pulled her knees up close and looked into the fire, and after a while she spoke to the coals, not to him. She eats like that because she's been walking 4 days. I've been chasing her for 3 of them. I eat like that because... She stopped, started again from somewhere else. Our mother went when Runa was born. Eating last was the part that fell to me. Fell to you, or you picked it up. Her silence lasted 3 cracks of the fire. You don't ask much, Kyla said, but you ask deep. The river taught me. It only speaks once a night, too. This time, the smile finished. Small, crooked, the tip of one tusk showing, and pulled back quickly, like a thing that had slipped past the guard. She settled her back against the stone and closed her eyes, and Torin realized she had decided to sleep. There, with a strange human 3 paces away, and a knife 1 hand's width from her fingers. He understood the size of that better than he would have understood any thank you. Kayla slept last, the same way she ate last. But she slept, and from the way her body let go all at once, all together, like an old fence finally allowing itself to lean, Torin knew it was the first time in many days. He stayed up a while longer, watching the fire sink. Before he went inside, he built the fire back up against the cold, brought out his winter coat, the heavy one, and laid it on the woodpile beside Kyla. Near enough to reach, far enough to refuse. Then he banked a bed of coals with ash to keep the warmth through the small hours, and he left the door of the house unlatched. Not out of carelessness, out of answer. Torin woke with the river, not with the sound of it, with the change in it. The thin hiss of low water had a cut in the middle now, a repeated gap, as if something large stood in the riverbed, forcing the current to split around it. He stepped out of the house into the kind of gray that isn't night anymore and isn't yet morning, the hour when rivers change hands. Snow had settled in the night, and ice feathered the still edges of the water. The fire was down to warm ash, and the coat he had left on the woodpile was gone from the woodpile and lay over the sleeping child. Runa slept. Kayla was sitting up, motionless, already awake, looking at the far bank. Torin followed her eyes. There was a figure on the other side of the river, standing in the shallows of the opposite bank, water to the middle of his shins, where thin plates of ice turned in the current and knocked against his legs, indifferent to all of it. Big in a way that needed no exaggeration. Shoulders like an old bull, arms crossed, a cloak of leather darkened by years. Skin so deep a green it was nearly black in the thin light. Gray hair bound back, and still in the way of those who have already won every waiting contest of their lives. Kayla, Torin said, low. I know, she answered. Her voice had been awake for a long time. That's our father. There had been no horn that morning. He no longer needed one. Runa woke at that moment, as if the word father had physical weight. She sat up in one motion, saw the figure on the far bank, and froze. The blanket still on her shoulders, her mouth open, no sound. Then her eyes went looking for her sister, and what was on the child's face was not the fear of a beating. It was worse. It was the fear of going back. The figure moved. He didn't shout his daughter's names. He didn't raise a hand. He stepped into the river and began to cross on foot. Slowly, choosing the stones of the riverbed with the patience of a man who has known rivers all his life. No hurry at all. And Torin, who was a man of the river, understood that this was worse than hurry. Hurry belongs to men afraid of arriving late. That orc walked like a man who knows that everything on the far bank will wait for him, because there is no other option. Kayla got to her feet. She took 2 steps and stopped, between the crossing father and the fire, between the father and her sister, between the father and the house. Her body said all 3 sentences at once, and her hand started down toward the knife. No, said Torin. She looked at him. Torin didn't look back. He was crouched at the ring of stones, waking the fire over the banked coals. He hung the black kettle on the iron, filled from the water jar. Then he went into the house and came back with cups. 4 cups. He set them in a row on the flat stone, side by side, mouths up. And he sat down in his chair, facing the river, waiting for the water to boil and the orc to arrive, in whichever order they came. Kaela looked at the 4 cups for a long moment. Then her hand moved away from the knife. Brakhan's stone jaw came out of the river without shaking himself off. The water ran from his cloak and his boots, and he let it run, climbing the bank with steps the ground seemed to accept rather than endure. Up close, he was bigger still. An old scar ran from temple to jaw, white against the dark green. His tusks were heavy, worn, yellowed with age. His eyes were Kyla's eyes, the same amber, but deeper, like a well where the same water has gone down too far. He stopped at the edge of the ring of stones. He looked at his daughters. Runa first, the length of an inventory. Whole, fed, covered. Kaela second, longer. Then he looked at the house, the fence, the fishing lines on the bank, the 2 chairs, and last of all, the human sitting down. "You own this," said Brakhan. It wasn't a question. The voice was stone rolling in deep water. "I do. My daughters slept under your roof. They slept under the sky, beside my fire." Brakhan weighed the correction. Something passed through his eyes and was filed away. The kettle whistled. Torin rose, filled the 4 cups with the bark tea that was what there was, and held the first one out to the orc chief. Standing, arm steady, without ceremony and without fear, which are the 2 wrong ways to serve. For the length of one breath, the chief's eyes measured the human's neck the way a woodsman measures a branch. Then the enormous hand took the cup instead. His eyes dropped to the flat stone and counted. 4 cups, set out in a row before he had finished the crossing. The human had seen him appear on the far bank, and instead of reaching for a weapon, a door bar, or a daughter, he had set 1 more cup on the stone. The orc chief held the cup a moment longer without drinking, and Torin understood that the moment was the old one redoing, in his head, everything he had planned to say on the way across. Because no man plans for a cup set out in advance. A man plans for a barred door. For an open one, there is no plan. There is only what you are. He didn't drink. He sat down on the big stone, the cup swallowed by his enormous hand, and began asking questions without asking any. 4 days, he said, looking at the fire. My daughters. 4 days on the road. Down river, where anything happens to anyone. A pause, and it happens that they find the one fire on this bank that shares the fish and charges nothing. He left the sentence hanging in the air with the hook showing. I charged, said Torin. Brakhan's gaze came up from the fire. I charged that the small one eat all of it. She paid. Behind her sister, Runa let out a short sound through her nose, almost a laugh, strangled just in time. Brakhan didn't turn toward her, but the corner of his eye recorded the sound, and something in the old orc's jaw unlocked by half a finger. You know why they ran, he said, again without a question in it. No. You didn't ask. No. Why? Torin gave a small shrug. Whoever arrives hungry eats first, explains after, if they want to. Brakhan looked at him for the length of 3 breaths. Then, for the first time, he drank. 1 swallow. He lowered the cup to his knee, and he spoke to the fire, his voice lower now, and Torin understood that this was the father speaking, not the chief. I promised the older one to the clan of Korvag Blacktusk, tusks of the north, hard people, good land. A pause the size of a winter. The war ate half of mine. What's left doesn't cross another bad winter alone. Black Tusk offers cattle, grain, and peace on the border, and he asks for one thing only. Nobody filled the silence. The small one heard it through the tent wall, Brakhan went on. She ran that same night, in the dark, alone. Took the smoked meat and the river path, like she'd been taught. His gaze passed over Runa without stopping on her. The older one went after her. Caught up to her a day from here. Torin looked at Kyla. She held his eyes without confirming or denying, but her hand, resting on Runa's shoulder, tightened just slightly, and the child leaned her head against her sister's arm, and that was all the confirmation the story needed. She didn't run from the marriage, Torin understood. She went after her sister, and somewhere on the road, she found the courage not to turn back. "Did you come to take them home," said Torin, "or to punish the man who sheltered them?" It was the question of the entire morning, and he set it on the table the way he had set down the fish, split down the middle, nothing on it. Brakhan took his second swallow. "Longer." "I don't know yet," said the chief. And it was the first thing he had said that sounded entirely true. It was a small thing that changed the morning. The big things always are. Torin leaned in to pour more tea for the chief, and his sleeve drifted toward the edge of the fire, too close to the flame, the way it happens 100 times a day to anyone who works beside an open fire. 100 times a day, nothing comes of it. Kayla moved before she thought. 2 fingers on his wrist, pulling the sleeve back a hand's width, without looking at the fire, without looking at him, in the middle of another breath. The whole gesture lasted less than a second, and it was the gesture of someone who has done it for years, of someone who knows the sleeve, the fire, the distance, and the man. Except she had known him for one night. Kayla realized what her own hand had done the instant it finished doing it. She drew it back. Too late. Brakhan had seen. The orc chief looked at his daughter's hand, then at the human's wrist, then at one face and the other, and whatever he read, there made the enormous body go still in a new way. The stillness of a man recalculating a crossing because the river has risen. He stood up. The whole morning went cold with him. Runa shrank against her sister. Kayla rose too, chin set, ready for the prohibition, for the shout, for the order to march, ready for everything she knew of her father. Brakhan did none of it. He set the half-full cup down on the flat stone, carefully, like a man marking a place he means to return to. He looked at Torin for a long moment, down from his full height, and what was in the look was not hatred. It was worse. It was appraisal. "I return at midday," said the chief. And he crossed the river back the way he came, slowly, without looking behind him, leaving the words planted on the bank like a brand new fence. They watched him until the far bank took him back. Nobody moved until the river sounded like a river again. "He's going to test you," said Kayla. She was pacing beside the fire, which was the first uneconomical thing Torin had seen her do. He doesn't forbid. He has never forbidden anything in his life. Forbidding is admitting the thing has beaten you. He tests. She stopped, looked at the empty far bank. When a suitor circles a chief's daughter, the father asks what he offers. The suitor brings cattle, brings land, brings a war name. Black Tusk offered an entire clan. She turned to face Torin. "Do you understand what is going to happen here at midday? He's going to ask me a question. He's going to ask you the impossible question. It's what he does. And when you have no answer..." She cut her own sentence off, started again, lower. "This is not your fight, Torin. One night and one fish don't make it your fight. When he comes back, stay with your lines. I'll settle it with him. I've always settled everything with him." Torin heard her out to the end, nodded once, and went to fetch the hammer and the wire. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He walked to the east fence, where 2 posts had rotted at the base, and a third had leaned outward for half a season, and he started to mend it. He pulled the first rotten post, dug, set new timber, stretched wire. Half a morning's work for a man alone, and half a morning was what he had. Kayla stood watching from the edge of the stone ring, arms crossed. "That's not an answer," she said. "No," Torin agreed, tapping the wire tight. "It's a fence." She gave up on him with a sound in her throat and went to look after her sister. She came back an hour later. Without a word, she braced the next post while he packed the earth around it, and they worked like that for a while, 4 hands and no talking, and the rhythm hands find on their own when no one interrupts them with speech. She was the one who spoke at the end, looking at the wire and not the man. "Do you know why I stopped at your fire?" said Kayla. "Yesterday, I saw your smoke from far off, from the rocks. 3 days on the road, and I had already passed wide of 7 fires. A fire on the road is a risk. Runa couldn't take one more risk. She stretched the wire for him to staple. So I climbed the big rock to measure your place before deciding. And I saw the 2 chairs. Her fingers tested the tension of the wire. Professional. Distracted. One worn down on your side. The other one, low, woven straw. Turned toward the fire, in her place. Nobody had sat in it for a long time. You could tell by the way it sat. And it was still there. In its place. Kayla let go of the wire and looked at him for the first time since she had started talking. A man who keeps a dead woman's chair in its place doesn't hurt 2 hungry strangers. That was the arithmetic I did. A pause. I climbed down and I woke Runa. Torin drove the staple. Once. Twice. He lowered the hammer. Did the arithmetic hold? It held with room to spare, said Kayla, and she picked up the next post. Before the sentence could grow into some place, neither of them would know how to carry in full daylight. It was Runa who appeared at the fence later, carrying a cup of hot tea nobody had asked for, her breath, and the cup steaming the same. She hung around, dragging her foot through the grass, handing him the wire before he asked, the way children help when what they really want is to ask something. The question came at the 3rd post. If we leave today, said Runa, looking at the wire and not at him, whose chair will you be keeping? Torin's hammer stopped in the air. The low one, the child pressed on, tipping her chin toward the fire, toward the sagging straw chair. Kayla told me not to ask whose it was, so I didn't ask whose it was. I asked whose you keep it for. That's different. Torin looked at the orc child. 9 winters. 10. The amber eyes of her father and her sister, and the aim of children, who hit on the first shot the target adults spent whole lives walking around. It was my wife's, he said. 2 winters since he had said it out loud, and the sentence came out with rust on it. I keep it for her. Runa considered the answer with the gravity of a clan council. But a chair isn't for keeping, she concluded, handing back the empty cup. A chair is for sitting. Otherwise, it's just sad wood. And off she went to help her sister, leaving the human standing at the fence with a hammer in his hand and a post half set, staring at a chair 50 paces away, as if he were seeing it for the first time. Brakhan returned when the shadows of the fence posts had pulled in to almost nothing beneath them. Torin saw him appear on the far bank and waited for what would come with him. The warriors of the clan, or the war horse, or at the very least the axe a chief carries when he wants a conversation to move quickly. Kyla, standing beside him, was waiting for the same. Torin could tell by the way her eyes were counting the shadows between the trees on the opposite bank. Brakhan crossed the river alone. No cloak, no weapon, nothing in his hands. And the hands themselves open, turned slightly outward as he walked, in a gesture anyone on the road would read as peace. Kyla went pale beneath the green. Empty hands, she said, low, only for Torin. Among our people, no chief comes empty-handed. Coming empty-handed says, I bring nothing, because today I only receive. Today, someone is going to give me something. She swallowed. It's the highest test. There is nothing above it. The chief climbed the bank and stopped in the same place as the morning, at the edge of the ring of stones. His cup still sat on the flat stone, half full, cold, exactly where he had left it. Brakhan looked at it. He recorded that no one had taken it away. Then he looked at the east fence. 3 new posts, the wire drawn tight, pale timber against the gray of the old. He walked the repair with his eyes from one end to the other, slowly, and Torin couldn't say what the old orc concluded. Only that he concluded something, because orcs like that one did not look at anything twice without a reason. Human, said Brakhan. Torin. Human, the chief repeated, and it wasn't an insult. It was method. A name is earned. My eldest daughter is worth an entire clan, cattle that doesn't run out, grain for 10 winters, peace on a border where my people have been dying since before she was born. That is what Korvag Blacktusk puts in my hand, for her hand. He took 1 step inside the ring of stones. I saw how she looks at your fire. I saw her hand on your wrist. I am not blind, and I am not a fool, and I will not pretend I crossed this river twice over a fish." The voice went down 1 stone deeper. "So I ask you the question I have asked every man who circled my daughters, and that not one of them has ever answered right." The river hissed. The fire cracked once. "What does a poor human offer a chieftain's daughter?" And there it was, the impossible question. Torin looked at the ground for a moment, and Brakhan allowed the moment, because an answer that comes too fast is also the wrong answer. Kayla opened her mouth to put herself between the two of them. Her father's hand rose half a span, without looking at her, and her mouth closed. Runa gripped her sister's arm with both hands. Torin thought about what he had: a house of stone and timber, a river of good days and bad ones, lines, hooks, half a new fence. Nothing that stood next to cattle without end, grain for 10 winters, peace on a bleeding border. By the measure of the world, the question had no answer, and he understood, looking into the chief's deep eyes, that this was exactly the trap. Any man who tried to compete with Black Tusk had already lost, because he had accepted the wrong currency. So he didn't compete. "Yesterday, I caught 1 fish," said Torin. "1. It was my supper. I cut it in 3, and the share that was left for me, I gave to your daughter, because she had given hers to her sister." Brakhan didn't move. "That's what I have to offer," Torin went on. "Half the fish, every day. On the days of big fish, and on the days of no fish. Half of whatever there is, even when there is only 1. He held the chief's gaze. "Black Tusk offers 10 winters of grain. I offer the near side of the table, for as long as I live. It isn't much, but it's whole, and it doesn't end when the grain ends." The silence that followed lasted long enough for the kettle to stop steaming. Brakhan looked at the human for a stretch of time that had bent bigger men. Torin didn't bend, not out of a warrior's courage, which he didn't have, but because he wasn't defending any lie, and the truth standing still tires slower than a lie does. "Half the fish," the chief repeated at last. He turned the words over in his mouth, like a man biting a coin to see if it was gold. "And if she wants the whole fish, then she catches her own," said Torin. "The river is big, and I teach." Behind Kayla, Runa laughed, out loud, unable to hold it, the clean laugh of a child cutting through the tension of the afternoon like a stone thrown into still water. She clapped her hand over her mouth too late, and Torin saw it. They all saw it. The scar on Brakhan's Stonejaw's face moved. The old chief's mouth pulled to one side, half a finger, against its owner's will. It never became a smile. It was the rough draft of one. Torin knew that draft. He had seen the same one, on the same mouth in a younger version, in the small hours of the night before, on the other side of the fire. Brakhan didn't answer the human. He turned to his eldest daughter. And Torin understood, in that single movement, that the impossible question had never been for him. It was a sieve, not a question. What the chief wanted to know was not what the human offered. It was whether the human knew who he was offering it to. The men who answered the father, listing their possessions, treating the daughter like goods to be bought from the owner. Those men failed before their sentence was finished. Torin had answered looking at the father, but he had offered to her table, to her life, to her choice. "Kayla," said Brakhan. Only the name. The rest of the question the old one asked with his eyes, and it was a question he had perhaps never asked her before, because the voice came out with the rust of sentences kept too long. Kyla looked at her father, at her sister hanging on her arm, at the human standing by the fire, who did not take a step toward her, did not reach out a hand, did not lean on her in any way. He only waited, the way he waited on the river, for things to come in the order they came. She made no speech. It wasn't her way, or his, or that riverbank's. She crossed the ring of stones, picked up her father's cold cup from the flat stone, tossed out the old tea, and filled it again with what was left in the kettle. She put it back, full and hot, into the enormous hands. "Drink before you cross," said Kayla. "The river is cold." It was the answer of a daughter who stays. All 3 of them understood it in the same instant, each from their own side of the fire. Brakhan drank, to the bottom this time, without hurry, the steam rising past the scar. Then he set the cup down, rose, and did the 2 things he did. In the order, he did them. First, he walked to the east fence. From inside his boot he drew the clan knife. Bone handle, dark blade, the one thing the empty hands had carried hidden. And he drove it into the new post, the middle one, deep, to the hilt, a clan's mark in a human's timber. The tusks of the north do not set foot on marked ground, he said, without turning around. Black Tusk will ask, I will answer. My people will eat a lean winter for this. They have eaten worse, for less. That is a matter between chiefs, not yours. Then he came back and put his hand on Runa's shoulder. You come home with me, small one. Runa opened her mouth. Her father's look left no room in it, but his voice went down to a place Torin would have wagered few in the clan had ever heard. Your sister has chosen her table. You are not yet of an age to choose tables, and your clan needs to learn your name properly before you forget it out here. A pause. You will see the flood, and you will see the dry season. Twice around the sun, I bring you down the river myself. A chief's word. Runa looked at Kyla. Kayla nodded. Once, her mouth pressed tight, and her eyes shining the way eyes shine on someone who has decided not to cry. And she didn't cry. Then Kayla crouched down in front of her sister, coming to her height. She took the fishing knife from her belt, the one with the worn handle, the one that had stood between them and the road, and she closed the child's small hands around the grip. New rule, said Kayla. From now on, you eat first. Hear me? First. Whoever carries the knife eats first. That rule doesn't exist, said Runa, her voice breaking in the middle. It exists starting now. I invented it. Kayla pressed her sister's hands inside her own. And at the flood, when you come, I want to see you taller than that middle post, the one with Father's knife in it. Deal? Runa didn't answer with words. She knocked her forehead against her sister's forehead, hard, the orc way, and the two of them stayed like that for as long as they needed, green against green, and neither of them cried, because each of them had been raised by a woman who eats last. Then the child made her farewell to the human. She didn't hug him. She went to the fire, picked up the cup she had drunk from that morning, the smallest of the four, and handed it to Torin with both hands, ceremonious, as if performing a rite she was inventing on the spot, and which, for that very reason, was worth more than the old ones. Keep mine, said Runa, but keep it by using it. Okay? Otherwise it turns into a sad cup. A fisherman's word, said Torin. Brakhan and his younger daughter crossed the river with the last of the light. Halfway across, Runa turned and waved, her whole arm twice. Her father didn't turn, but he stopped. 2 steps, water to his shins, his back to the bank. Human, said the chief to the river. At the next flood, when I bring the small one down. The rest took as long as a stone chosen from the riverbed. Catch 2. And he finished the crossing. Night came down the same as the night before, and with it came the snow. Patient now, settling in for the season. The fire rose in the same ring of stones and held its circle of bare ground against the white. The river hissed thin. Low water still. Deep fish. But tomorrow was another day, and other water. Torin brought out the big net, the one that had needed mending since the last moon, and sat down in his chair. Runa's small cup stood on the flat stone, washed, within reach of his hand, full of tea nobody was going to drink. In use, the best way he knew how. On the other side of the fire, nobody sat on the ground against the big stone anymore. Kayla had pulled up the low chair, the one with the sagging straw. She set it at the right angle to the light without asking what the right angle was, sat down in it like someone sitting where she had always sat, and reached out her hand for the other end of the net. They mended in silence, each from their own side, her knots tighter than his. Tomorrow, said Kyla, without lifting her eyes from the net, I catch my own. Torin pulled the next knot through. Half of it's already mine. The straw of the chair creaked, the small sound of a weight settling in better. In the dark, beside the fire, nobody kept anything anymore. If this story reached you, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I read every one, and it means more than you know to see how far this fire travels. And if you believe a story like this deserves to be told, subscribing is how you pull up a chair at this fire. There's another story on your screen right now, one I think you'll carry with you the same way. Click it, and I'll see you there.